Hello BookTube, I'm Jonathan, and recently I read 4 classic sci-fi books, 2 of which were hard sci-fi, the other 2 being soft sci-fi. So I'm going to give you quick reviews for all 4 of them, let you know which is my favorite, and then at the end I'm going to tally up the scores to see who won this mini battle between hard and soft sci-fi. So let's get started with the first book, Mission of Gravity by Hal Clement. Mission of Gravity takes place on a disc-shaped planet called Mescaline that's so cold its oceans are liquid methane and its snows are frozen ammonia. Human explorers want to recover an unmanned probe, but with a gravity 700 times greater than Earth's, they need some assistance, and the Mescalinites that are uniquely adapted to the environment are their only hope. This book lies pretty far to the hard end of the sci-fi spectrum. Hal Clement taught chemistry and astronomy, and that definitely comes through in the book. He uses science as the primary basis for the world building, the characters, and the plot. In terms of the world, it's definitely one of the most interesting settings that I've read in a science fiction book. It reminded me a little bit of Inverted World by Christopher Priest in the way that the world itself informed the story. Clement has a pleasant writing style, and even though it is rather heavy on the science, I still found it to be relatively readable. He does provide you a lot of technical information, but it never got to the point where I found it to be overwhelming or confusing. When it came to the characters, I found the Mescalinites to be a unique species. The way their biology interacted with the chemistry and the physics of their environment, I thought was explored rather well and helped to separate them from the human characters. I think the book also did a good job of addressing issues that are associated with first contact, such as communication issues, the uneven levels of understanding on certain topics, as well as cultural differences. However, in regard to the psychology and the personalities of the different individual characters, I didn't find the Mescalinites overly different from the humans, so when it came to the challenge of creating aliens that truly felt alien, I would say that Clement was successful, but in some areas more so than others. The plot is rather simple, but it has a sense of adventure to it, and it does use a formula that I enjoy, which is introducing problems and then using science in order to solve those problems. The main issue that I had with the plot was that it felt like it had relatively low stakes. For example, why did we really need to rescue this unmanned probe? What would happen if we don't rescue the probe? And this lack of stakes affects the entire journey because there aren't really any emotional highs or lows. There's just one objective, and while there might be individual chapters that are interesting, I was never overly invested in the final outcome. In the end, I think this is a book that does certain things really well. If you enjoyed a book like Dragon's Egg by Robert L. Forward, then I think this is going to be the type of sci-fi book for you. For me, while I did appreciate certain things and found certain elements of the book to be rather clever, I just never really connected with it on a personal level. And for those reasons, for me, Mission of Gravity was a 6.5 out of 10. Up next we have Norstrilia by Cordwainer Smith. Rod McBan, the 151st, farms the lucrative immortality drug called Stroon. However, he's also a telepathic cripple and faces being culled under Norstrilia's population laws. In order to protect himself, he uses his not strictly legal computer to amass an unimaginable fortune. If only he can stay alive long enough to spend it. Norstrilia is some truly wacky soft science fiction, and the far future setting is remarkably creative. The culture and the technology are definitely different from the modern world, yet the story that plays out within this world I think is still thematically relevant to modern readers. I wouldn't say it's a comedic novel, but some of the absurdist elements are amusing and do provide a nice balance to some of the darker themes and heavier moments. I think one of the book's strengths is its analysis of certain social dynamics, as well as their effects on an individual's psychology. As a main character, I didn't find Rod McBan that interesting a personality, but I did enjoy his character's emotional journey and I empathized with his experiences. I should point out that while Norstrilia is a standalone novel, it does take place within Cordwainer Smith's Instrumentality of Mankind universe. Many people recommend reading the short story collection The Rediscovery of Man beforehand, but I don't really like being given homework. Having read the novel, do I think that's necessary? No, I think you can go straight to the novel if you want to, but that is in part due to my edition of this novel, including one of the shorts from that collection called The Ballad of Lost Camel as a prelude. So without having read all of the short stories, I felt like pretty quickly I was able to pick up the story and the world. However, there is one character that is introduced in that particular short that ends up playing a fairly important role in the novel, so I think it was a worthwhile inclusion. Getting back to the novel itself, while I did enjoy the setting and themes, I felt like the plot was a little bit hit or miss. It introduced a number of interesting plot threads, but some of them I felt moved rather slowly, whereas others were resolved just a little bit too easily. I also felt like a lot of the supporting characters lacked the personality or motivations in order to justify some of the time that we spent away from Rod and the main storyline. Another minor complaint that I had about this book was it does contain quite a lot of songs. Does anyone ever actually enjoy songs in books? Like, why do authors think that we will enjoy this? Oh, what's that? A bunch of repetitive metaphors in italics without accompanying music? Hooray! Anyway, overall, this was a unique reading experience. It's hard for me to find books or authors to compare Cordwainer Smith to. The only couple that came to mind were Philip K. Dick and Alfred Bester. They both share some of the same weird qualities, but not so much in a surreal way where you're not exactly sure what is real or what's not. In this book, it's all real. It's just literally that strange. I really liked how creative this book was, and there were a handful of poignant moments. I just wanted a little bit more plot and character development. I gave Norstrilia a 7.5 out of 10. Next up we have Eon by Greg Bear. Eon is one of those books where I think the less you know about the premise, the better. I would actually discourage you from reading the blurb, as I think it might ruin some of the fun. All I'll say is that it's set in the future at the beginning of the 21st century, which for us is no longer actually the future, and a giant potato-shaped stone appears within Earth's orbit. It's a classic rendezvous with Rama type big dumb object story. And this is a subgenre I tend to enjoy as it comes with built-in mysteries. Where did it come from? Why is it here? What does this mean for humanity? And sometimes in these books, these mysteries can feel a little stretched out, but I thought the pacing in Eon was great, as it was constantly providing you with little reveals that had me more and more intrigued. This is a hard sci-fi novel, but I'd say it's a little bit more accessible than Mission of Gravity. I wouldn't say it's a character-first story, but we do have a cast of characters that to me each felt like they had unique personality traits and motivations. Someone in my Discord server said that they didn't enjoy Greg Bear's prose, which I found to be an interesting comment because this is the second book I've read from Greg Bear after Blood Music, which I absolutely loved, and I didn't find that I had any issues with the writing style. So when it came to the writing in Eon, again, I thought it was fine. I wouldn't necessarily describe it as being a strength or a weakness. However, there were some scenes where Bear was trying to describe some things on a pretty epic scale, and I had a little bit of trouble visualizing them. So perhaps that was a shortcoming on my part, or maybe Bear didn't quite have the writing chops to pull those particularly tricky scenes off. For me, I loved the first half of this book, and then it took a bit of a turn. It introduces a number of new elements that I found to be rather creative and ambitious, but narratively I don't think they ever really came together, and it seemed to lose a lot of the tension and momentum that the first half had. Also, some of the character decisions were very uninteresting to me, and some sex scenes just seemed to pop up out of nowhere. None of them were particularly graphic or egregious, but they just made me think, where did this come from? How is this helping the story? This is a tough one for me to rate because the first half was fantastic, but the second half was a bit of a mess and for me ultimately unsatisfying. And not in a cop-out way because we do get some answers, it was just by that point for me a lot of the magic had gone. In the end, I ended up giving Eon a 7 out of 10. And lastly, Nonstop by Brian Aldiss. Curiosity was discouraged in the Green Tribe. Its members lived out their lives in cramped quarters, hacking away at the encroaching Ponics. But when a renegade group venture into unmapped territory, they make a series of discoveries which turn their universe upside down. Nonstop is a book that features some fantasy tropes while still being science fiction. It does explore a little bit of science, but I would definitely say it resides on the softer end of the sci-fi spectrum. Firstly, something I really liked about this book was the relationships. You have a group that is not so much a heroic fellowship of friends, but rather a group of mean and stupid people that actively disdain each other. I think this book does a great job of examining emotions, in particular anger, the internal and external reasons for its presence, and regardless of whether it's a justified or unjustified response, how it's something that needs to be addressed and managed. Most of the characters in this book aren't particularly likable, but I like how the book exposed their flaws, and I found at times their obliviousness or their hubris to be rather amusing. I won't say which particular character because I don't want to spoil anything, but Nonstop probably featured my favorite supporting character that I've read this year. Sometimes you just pick up a book and you know it's going to be good right away, and Nonstop is one such example. Aldiss includes an introduction to this book, and within one paragraph, I knew he was a good writer. And one of the ways he displays this is the way he plays with language. This future culture has a number of sayings and expressions that are very similar to expressions that we use in our modern day society, with just slight differences that completely change the meaning. I'll give you just one short silly example. There is a common expression they use that is leap before you look instead of look before you leap. And it's just little things like this that give you an insight into the differences in the mentality and philosophy of this particular society. The amount of world building this book packs into 200 pages is remarkable. The depth of history is impressive, and the truths of this history are slowly uncovered by the characters and us, the readers. My issues with this book were pretty minor. There were a few brief moments that for me killed the momentum of the plot just a little, and there were some pretty cool reveals towards the end, although I had already figured out a number of them. And lastly, there's one fantastical element included in the book which to me felt a little bit out of place, but fortunately it wasn't a major part of the story. For me, picking up Nonstop was definitely a success, and I look forward to trying more from Brian Aldiss. I gave Nonstop an 8.5 out of 10. So there you go, Nonstop was my clear winner, and when we tally up the scores, Team Hard Sci-Fi ended up with a score of 13.5 out of 20, and Team Soft Sci-Fi ended up with a score of 16 out of 20. So perhaps a little bit of an unexpected result, as I do read a pretty even amount of soft sci-fi and hard sci-fi, but a couple of my all-time favorites like House of Suns and Permutation City are on the harder end. So it's a very small sample size, but maybe a little bit of a small upset there for Team Soft Sci-Fi. Let me know which side you are on. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash or just gently click the subscribe button. And if you really enjoyed it, consider checking out the perks of becoming a Patreon member, where you can become one of my robots, androids, or cyborgs like Nima, A New Eden, Half Ogre, Zakawe, and The Ballad of Lost Colin. And you can find more sci-fi content over here.